How are you?
I'm well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Can't complain. It's been a nice week, but it's going to
Yeah.
be even better now that you're here. I'm so
Thank
excited
you.
to have you
Me
on the
as
show.
well.
Y'all don't even know. Y'all don't even know. I've been so excited since our intro call. And so I'll just pass it off to you to let you introduce yourself to our audience today.
Yeah, thank you. That's very sweet of you. My name is Mia Kalish. I'm a senior at the University of Vermont. I study environmental science. I have two minors. They're writing and dance. I'm a scientist. I'm an artist. I write music. I play music. I'm very passionate about the outdoors, and I am looking to just continue a career in research.
That's so cool. One thing that's interesting to me is like your major is in environmental science, but your minors are more on like the art side. Can you tell
Yeah.
me tell me how you picked your major and your minors?
Yeah, I feel like it's actually from the scientists that I have known in my lifetime, which has not been that long so far. I feel like a lot of people are artists and scientists, and it works together really well. And in fact, I think a big reason I'm interested in biology or got interested in biology is because there's so many pictures in the textbook, which sounds pretty silly, but like when you're studying humanities, you're reading literature and essays, and when you're studying science like organic chemistry, you're looking at pictures and you're doing puzzles. And I think in that way science and art fits together a lot of the time. But also we're advised by other environmental science people when we come into the school. A lot of people say if you're passionate about art, be sure to add an art minor so that you don't get burnt out when you're an environmental science major. And I thought that was really interesting.
That's so cool. No one ever
Yeah.
told me that for the social sciences.
Yeah. Yeah, I think anyone who's passionate about an art should keep doing it as long as they can, for your soul. But yeah, we're told that explicitly our freshman year, which I think is very neat.
Wow. So, is there a reason why you particularly chose those two as your minors? Were there other minors that you were considering that were in the art realm?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like if I could, I would have like five minors, but I was a dancer for a very long time. My parents put me in ballet as a little girl, where I feel like a lot of little girls were put into ballet. But then when I was like a preteen, I drifted away from dance a little bit. And then when I was a preteen, I realized I was like, oh, I need to be a dancer. I saw Dance Moms actually, which I think is a pretty funny show to bring you into dance because there's a lot of chaos in that show. But I saw that show and I saw the young girls dancing. I was like, they are so cool. I need to do that. And so I just begged my parents to put me in dance lessons. And then I did competitive dance for a really long time and ballet again. And I got to college, and my freshman year, I didn't dance at all. I actually auditioned for two dance clubs on campus, and I didn't get into either of them. And I was very sad, and I didn't realize that you could just take classes without auditioning. So then my sophomore year, I learned you could do that, and I joined a class, and I was in a show, and I just felt all that joy come back and that passion come back. And it's so far, it's been great. It's been like 3 years in the dance department. I've made a lot of friends. It's wonderful to have that like really tight knit community. My science classes are huge. Like a chemistry class is like 200 people in a lecture, and you're just kind of watching the professor give the knowledge to you, versus a dance class is like 10 people and you're sitting in a circle and you're dancing with your professor every day and you're sweating with your professor and like listening to music with them. And so it's been great to be able to have that like tighter knit community. And then with the writing, again, I have always been a reader. I've always been a writer. I used to like at recess in elementary school, I used to take a journal and just like write in the journal all through recess. I would write these like fictional stories. And I don't know, for some reason that was just so obvious to me when I got to school. I was like, I have to study English of some kind. So I took an English class, and then I found out you could minor in just writing. And I was like, that's exactly what I want to do. So I've done poetry and nonfiction, and I've studied some modernist novels. And yeah, that's just been a great enriching part of my college experience so far is those dance minors in addition to studying science.
That is so cool. And I love the diversity in just even within your minors, there's still some like fluidity in those two
Mm-hmm.
of what dance means to you, even
Yeah.
what types of writing you get to do. I think that's super cool. And I didn't know that you could have a dance minor either without having to be a part of
Yeah.
something.
It's great. At least at UVM. I know we do it a very specific way. It's a really cool community. I feel like anyone who may be listening who is maybe a part of the dance department at UVM would know what I'm talking about. It's super inclusive, and we talk a lot about the history of dance and how dance has a very long and dark history of being very exclusive to a lot of people. So kind of counteracting that with just bringing everybody in. It's open to everybody. Maybe not everyone knows about it. We try our best to tell people about it, but like you don't need to have years and years and years of experience. You just need to want to dance. And I think that's what's so beautiful about it.
Yeah, it's definitely another form of expression. And then writing is similar in that same regard. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious to know for your writing minor, do you feel like that helps you at all in your major when you're writing as a researcher?
Yes, absolutely. Even though I'm doing creative writing and my classes have been in creative writing, I feel like taking writing classes has allowed me to write braver, if that makes sense. I'm a
Hmm.
braver writer now than I was before. I was actually in the lab this morning at work and writing my discussion section for my research that I did this summer. And I just was able to kind of throw the words on the page without maybe a few years ago. What I would have done is really think each sentence before I'm able to get it out and think, oh, does this make sense? Does this make sense? After so many writing classes, I'm just like, okay, here are the words. And I just put them all out. And then I can read them again and make sure that they make sense. But that kind of ability to have classes where you practice writing all the time, that has certainly helped build my confidence in a way that does transfer to scientific writing, even though, of course, it's a very different thing. I think it still transfers. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's definitely like some duality in that too.
Mm-hmm.
Of you already practice all these other forms of like creative writing on a daily, of like looking at poetry, looking at nonfiction. And then it almost feels like scientific research is like another form of that. It's
Mm.
kind of like you are these characters in creative writing almost, of like,
Yeah.
I'm a poet, now I'm this, and now,
Right.
you're a scientist most of the time. And I love that you said that it makes you a braver writer and just getting things out there. Like,
Yeah.
I felt you when you said, otherwise, I would have to think through every single sentence before I write
Mm-hmm.
it. I was there for sure.
Thank you.
Before like I studied anthropology, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is crazy. But
Mm-hmm.
now, since then, and I took a minor in marketing, so I kind of did a
Cool.
little bit of
Yeah.
a flip flop of kind of like the social sciences and business.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was able to understand marketing and having to write that stuff down of like pinpoint, I was like, oh my God, this is legendary. Why don't they teach people about this? And so I definitely relate to your experience in that and how it assisted your major. And I want to go a little bit more into your major actually. We talked about why you chose your minors. Now tell me why you chose your major of environmental science.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I was fortunate enough to take AP Environmental Science in high school. That felt like a really wonderful opportunity. And I learned that I wanted to be an environmental science major because I was just reading the textbook and I felt incredibly captured by that material and enthralled, and reading about nutrient pollution, warming of the ocean becoming more acidic with that warming, all of those things, so many problems. I just thought, wow, this is seems to be the most important issue that there is today. Like I don't because it's so impending, because we have to do something now or else it will pass that threshold after which there's no return. I thought this is what I need to study. Somehow I need to do what I can to make an impact. And yeah, so I'll just say the reading the AP Environmental Science textbook really got me into that field, and I thought it was essential that we do something as soon as we can. It's interesting, I think, applying to college and applying with a certain major in mind, because I was 17. A lot of people changed their majors. I felt like I was kind of just throwing something out there where I was like, oh, I read this textbook. I do feel super passionate about it. And I think it's interesting how we can just choose that major and just, we're kind of just thrown into that. And I'm still only 21, but so far it has worked out for me. And I think that's pretty fascinating. Um, I will say there was also a program I was in middle school called Envirothon.
Hmm.
And yeah, that was pretty fun. Um, my friends are going to call me a nerd here. It was fun for me. We competed against other schools, but I'll use air quotes for competed because what we did was we took tests as a team, and then other schools took tests. We all would be in the same room. Basically, it was a lecture style club. It was Friday afternoons. And I remember it was Friday afternoons because our instructor, Dr. Limbo, would incentivize us to come by buying a lot of treats. He would go to he would go to Harris Teeter and buy like a bunch of cookies and be like, "You guys have to come. I have cookies." And I remember thinking, "Oh, it's a Friday," and I'd be like, "Oh, but there's cookies," and it really would work. It would get me to go to the club. He was great. He was wonderful. It worked. My mom loves to tell this story because I had a huge binder. So this was middle school. I was about 13 years old, but it was college level material, and there were all these subjects that you would have a major and a minor in the club. My major was current environmental issues, and my minor was forestry. And I would take this big binder home from school every day, and I would take the bus to the cafe and then study the binder. And it wasn't a part of any of my classes, it was just for fun. And I think I really owe a lot to that teacher because I absolutely just like fell in love with that field and with the level of knowledge he had. Like we would go on walks through the woods and he would know every single tree. So I remember watching him and thinking, I want to be like that. I want to be a person who knows every tree and knows every bird because I was always passionate about the environment. I would go on really long walks in the woods all the time after school. That was like my activity after school was walking through the woods. And but I didn't know any of the names and I didn't know the processes. And it felt like I was walking blind. And then he gave me that terminology and that understanding. So yeah, I would say it was AP Environmental Science class and Envirothon Club in middle school, the science class in high school, and those two really pushed me into the field. And I'm very very grateful for both of them because now it just seems like that's what I'll be doing my whole life if I'm lucky enough.
One first shout out Dr. Limbo. That's
Yeah, yeah, he's the
genius.
best. Yeah.
That's genius to get people to come. I remember hearing about Envirothon when I was growing up, and then
Mm-hmm.
I also had the pleasure of taking AP Environmental Science, like when I was a freshman in high school. Um, and I mean, like you learned so much versus how I was viewing that class. I was like, no more algae, please.
Oh yeah.
No more cycles. I can't.
Yeah, Dr. Limbo also he told us if we won, he would wear a skirt. I
Mhm.
don't know. He would wear a kilt, his very like ceremonious kilt. It was actually a very important, cool thing. And I don't know why that incentivized us so much, but it did. And so we won at our regional competition and he wore his kilt to our club and we were very excited about it. So he knew how to incentivize kids. It was awesome.
I love it. Love that heritage coming through.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting hearing you talk about like how kind of embedded you were in even with your minor at the time of like
Mm-hmm.
forestry and walking through the woods. I love that stuff and understanding like the taxonomy and
Mm-hmm.
everything. And there's this, I don't know if you know of this TikToker. Her name is Alexis. She does foraging a lot and she teaches people about different like plants and berries and things they can eat, things they can't eat that look similar. And she always has this tagline of like, happy snacking, don't die at the end. Um,
I
and that's
have
an,
seen that actually. Yeah.
yeah, it's like you got that whimsy of what that life was like, but at an early age with your teacher. And I think that's so cool.
Yeah, I love that you use that word whimsy. Absolutely. I I do think a lot about the relationship between technology and development and young kids' brains and environmental science because I remember being so bored as a kid and I I've read a few articles about how, we're rarely ever bored today. And it's actually super important for us to be bored because we need to figure out how to entertain ourselves, but also how to study things. And that's how we make young scientists, is we have young people being really curious about things and asking all these questions. And when I was growing up, I was allowed to watch some TV, but I didn't have an iPad or anything. So that's because I was so bored, I was able to read so many books, and I went on so many walks in the woods and stared at leaves and trees and built forts and ran through the creek. And I think that I am very, very fortunate to have been able to grow up that way. Of course, not everyone has access to a clean and available and safe forest. So I do think, yeah, I think a lot about, to use the phrase, kids these days. Like I worry that, we're giving kids too many iPads and they can't walk in the woods, just because I think that's how I became an environmental scientist. And I worry if we are losing future environmentalists because maybe they're indoors more. I don't know. I feel like
Mm.
we have been leaning more. Like I see a lot of parents, even though there is so much technology out there, I see a lot of parents leaning towards, oh, I don't like having those rules and restrictions. But that is definitely something I think about a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I know a lot of iPad kids for
Yeah.
sure. Can't even sit and eat dinner without
Mm.
without a cellular device. And
Oh,
I was also, like you, fortunate enough to grow up with a parent who was a teacher, and she happened to teach science. And so she stressed the importance of asking why at a very early age. Yes, it's like the phrase, Maddie knew who she was at a very young age. That was
yeah.
my mom.
That's so
That was her.
awesome.
And then for high school, we had, I went to a magnet school. So we had like a
Mhm.
creek next to our high school. And so we would like walk down the steps and go over this bridge. And then we would do like soil samples and water samples. And I had to take classes like oceanography and got to learn about calcification and did an A to Z PowerPoint deck about my favorite marine life. Like, stuff like that
Yeah.
people necessarily wouldn't search out, one, if they weren't bored, but also
Yeah.
two, of just like having the space and the curiosity to want to lean into those things when you find it, versus just like, oh, cool, that's a little fun fact, but like actually looking deeper into it and more. I think that's what leans me towards like herbalism today and all the fun things that I do outside of corporate, because just like how you said, for your major and your minor, it's a balance, but it's also something that you care about. And I think sometimes if we're gearing more towards technology, there are less things that we're able to be more curious and care about, that are maybe to the same degree, that give us that dopamine. It may not be as immediate, but I think it becoming gradual is like part of the curiosity and the care process. So I'm glad, especially if we have scientists like you who grew up that way, I think we'll be in good hands. And I
Oh,
think
thank you.
something that you said earlier that was kind of exciting that I wanted to talk about, was your research that you did. I wanted to
Yeah.
hear a little bit more about what is that like. Tell us about your research. Don't leave out a detail.
Okay, gladly. First of all, I want to say that's your mom sounds awesome. That seems like a great way to grow up, with a mom who is a science teacher. That just seems amazing. And yeah, to get into my research, I know I have to reference my scholarship every time I say it. I talk about my research, and it's a long title, so I'm going to say it slowly. It's the Food Systems Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship from the FOR office of the University of Vermont. And FOR stands for Fellowships and Opportunities in Undergraduate Research.
Wow.
Hopefully I got that all right. So that is the grant that allowed me to conduct my own research this summer, which, especially among everything happening in politics and in scientific funding today, I just want to say I'm incredibly grateful I was able to have this opportunity. When I was applying for this fellowship, there was a lot of concern that maybe I would not get the funding, but I did after all, and I feel very lucky because not everyone got their scientific projects funded this summer, and a lot of people are facing cuts in the scientific community, and it's something that is a big concern of mine and a lot of other people's, and something that has been deeply upsetting. So I just want to put that out there. But yes, my research is in agroecology. My advisor is Dr. Eric von Wetberg, and I am actually studying mung beans. And I worked on a farm all summer conducting this research. I actually did not do much of any lab work this summer, which was
Mm.
pretty great. The summer before, I did a lot of lab work, and I loved that too. But I really kind of lived like a farmer. I wasn't, you know, farming. I was monitoring these plants, but I worked with the farmers at the horticulture farm and research center in Vermont, and everyone there is so awesome, and the farmers there are so cool. So I got to learn a lot about agriculture and what it means to work in agriculture. But the farmers there gave me the nickname Mung Bean Mia because I study, in academic science, we talk about learning a lot about a little. So I know a lot about this one plant. Basically, what we were looking at is 53 different accessions of mung beans from the USDA seed bank. So accessions means types, and they're all grown in the same time period, which at the same time. So they have different genes, but they're all collected at the same time. And we grew about two replicates of the 53 samples. So we had 110 ID numbers, so 110 different types of the 53 accessions. Essentially, I was looking at how they could best grow in Vermont because mung beans are a very culturally significant food to Southeast Asia in countries like India and Nepal. And my research is based off the idea that there are a lot of new Americans in the area in Vermont that are from those areas where that legume is culturally significant. That's not to say that everyone from those countries knows how to make things with mung beans,
Mm.
but there's a cultural knowledge there. And so something that we can do is build food security and build autonomy for people who are new to this country when we can study a plant that is culturally significant to them and say, hey, we know exactly how this plant grows here, and we know which accession grows the best. And we think you should grow this type and you should water it this much. And if you see the leaves doing this, then you should do this. So, like, we had magnesium deficiency, and that's when obviously the plant is deficient in that nutrient, but it presents itself by having yellow splotchy leaves. So we now know, and we have that research. At first we thought it was mung bean yellow mosaic virus, but after taking tissue samples, we found that these leaves actually weren't infected at all. They just had a deficiency of nutrients, which is actually great. If you're going to have a problem, it's a great problem to have because you can just add magnesium directly to the plant. So that's something that we now know. And when we have smallholder farmers growing mung beans who may come search for research or may ask people at Vermont in our department, why do my beans look like this? We can say it's because you need to add magnesium. So that's just one of the ways that we can help farmers. There's a lot of reasons why we're looking into mung beans. They are flood resistant, they are drought resistant, which is really cool that they're both. They have a great potential in being a sustainable crop and definitely a huge climate crop. So this is because they are so resistant to drought. And we had an insane drought in Vermont this summer. A lot of, I know you're in Georgia, but I think a lot of people in New England have been talking about it. I don't know if it's the same in the Southeast or if it was the same in the summer, but that was a huge issue of concern. And then for a few weeks, actually, at the farm, our water was not working. There was someone ran over a hose, and we couldn't get water to our mung beans for a little
Oh
bit.
my
But good news is they really are drought resistant.
God.
And it was great. So in the spring semester, I was, applying for this fellowship, and that took a lot of research and literature review. And I was writing about how drought resistant they are. And then in the summer, I was out there on the farm, and I was like, well, these beans haven't been watered in 2 weeks, but they're looking okay. They were actually, because their leaves are so fibrous and tough, they don't really get as floppy as other leaves that you can imagine, like a houseplant. What else to say about mung beans? There's so much to say about mung beans. They are nitrogen fixers. They are nutrient rich and protein rich, so they can really help provide for dietary needs in that way. I guess please stop me if you think I need to
You're fine.
explain
Like,
any scientific terms. Okay. So, for those listening who don't know what a nitrogen fixer is, there's nitrogen in our atmosphere. It's actually the most common element in the atmosphere, in the air. But that, and plants need nitrogen, but that nitrogen in the air cannot be used by plants. So it must be fixed, it must be turned into a different form of nitrogen by the bacteria in the soil. And that can be done by beans and by legumes, which is really cool. It actually happens on these things called nodules on the roots of the legumes. So when you can have a plant fix nitrogen for you, you don't have to add nitrogen to your soil as a farmer. That's really good for the quality of the soil and for the health of the soil, and can prevent nutrient pollution if you're adding a bunch of nitrogen. Here in Vermont, we are right by Lake Champlain, which is a huge lake. It's not as big as the Great Lakes, but it actually used to be recognized as a Great Lake for like a few months and then was taken off the list. So nutrient pollution is a big concern of ours. And with so many agricultural processes, agriculture is like the second most important part of our economy, I think, behind ecotourism. So obviously in Vermont, we're very invested in the environment because of those two processes, but we can have a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus from the resulting agricultural processes go into the lake, and that's how we get algal blooms. And I was actually working at the Rubenstein lab last summer studying algae, so it's cool how they interact.
these mung
Yeah,
beans
I
are
think
superheroes. Oh
yeah,
my.
they're a pretty great crop. They're a pretty great crop. Um, Oh, yeah. So essentially, the goal of the research, my advisor Eric told me one day on the farm, he said, "You're trying to find the mung bean to rule all mung beans," which I thought was a really great way to put it. Um, Essentially, we're trying to find the accession type that best suits Vermont, and so that we can, again, as I said before, inform farmers on which types to grow, how to grow them, and hopefully we can kind of improve that seed bank, or use this research to improve the seed bank.
That is so cool.
Thank you. Yeah.
Like,
Go ahead. Sorry.
no, like, I think that's just so cool of just how much how much research goes into one plant. um
Yeah.
but also two, like the significance behind the why of how
Mhm.
it's almost like a community crop in a way. And even in science, there's the inclusivity of like, we want to be able, based on our population and seeing like what is culturally significant to them, seeing, what we have here in Vermont, how can we, create the best outcome for these plants to be grown. And also just how do we find the super bean of all mung
Yeah.
beans? It's fascinating just to kind of think about like, not only really having that information to put into the seed bank, but also looking at it almost as like it's kind of like an archive or like a repository of
Yeah.
some sort, that farmers can look back on. And I think like, I'm sure they probably want to know this about so many other crops as well, of like these similar studies and just that support for farmers, especially in the area that they're in, versus like, traditional generalized knowledge of you put the plant in the ground,
Hmm.
you water it a little bit, X, Y, Z. I know that's something, at least for me, like in personal gardening, that I really care about, of now like getting to know like what's my zone, what can I grow on my balcony,
Yeah.
and what do I need for this, and this, and what can I plant in containers that can't be planted, like, stuff like that. And having to be kind of like your own little mad scientist, but getting to see you do such impactful work. And of course, like all small but mighty beans, literally. Just seeing how important like that agricultural research is, and really the effects of what that could do for Vermont, particularly, and like you said, how that being part of the economy that you guys care about, and how invested you are around like the environment, ecotourism, and like what you're doing now and how impactful it is. That's so cool to be part of like that is really groundbreaking work. Like honestly, to me, that is, of just being able to support farmers in their ecosystems in ways that people wouldn't typically expect.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for saying that. I I definitely did feel very inspired today while I was writing my discussion. Another part of the research is we're studying if we can cook leaves, the mung bean leaves, which if you are a consumer of mung beans or a planter of mung beans and you're listening, you might think that's a bit strange because it's not culturally how mung beans have been eaten. And mung beans have been eaten by people for like 3,000 years. People don't really eat the leaves because they are super spiky. They have all these fibers on them and they are super tough and they are bitter. And actually, I'm not selling them very well, but just like wait for it, it gets better. But like when you eat them raw, it like burns your throat. Um,
Ah.
Here in Vermont, we have a climate kitchen, which is a kitchen lab, which is super cool. And I worked with one of my advisors in the lab a full, like this, we spent this whole day, like 8 hours, just like cooking. Actually, I think it was like 4 hours, but we just like cooked mung bean leaves all day. And our experiment was how can we cook these leaves the best, which was super fun. And I remember my advisor, Alexis, turned to me at one point after she ate a leaf and she was like, does your throat hurt? And I was like, yes, it does. And also, I remember my advisor, Eric, at one point, I was like, can I eat raw leaves? And I was kind of looking on the website or looking on the internet and there wasn't a lot of information. And he was like, well, we don't really know. There might be some toxins. And then he said, but there's a really long history of biologists testing their research on themselves, so maybe try a few leaves and see how you feel. I was like, okay. So the links we go to get our
Science.
research. Yeah, seriously. But something I felt really inspired by today, what I want to get back to is like research that helps people. I think what I was trying to get at before talking about being 17 and just thinking climate change was the most important thing. Of course, climate change is super essential, but I've found that all at the root of all environmental issues, what I care about most is often the people. I mean, there are some issues where, there's really charismatic species like polar bears, and some issues where I'm really concerned about a species of tree getting to survive and not be extinct. But at the root of most environmental issues, it is public safety, which I think is fascinating and exciting and was unexpected. I did not expect to learn that from my time in college. I always pictured like wildlife and nature as one thing and people as another, which is a huge issue in environmental science and why I think when environmentalism lacks support, it often lacks support because people think it's about wildlife and not about them. But really, you can never separate the two. So being in the lab today, I learned that if we can successfully cook mung beans, cook their leaves, we can really, really help out small shareholder farmers and increase their profit of if they choose to grow mung beans, which would be great for the environment. It could be great for them if they're able to cook the leaves, and that could increase their profits by almost 3 or 4 times, which I found out just today. That's my estimate. It may be flawed, but it definitely would increase profits. And what we learned after that day in the kitchen is that you can blanch them and then saute them, and that really helps. And you can also cook them like kale chips. So if we can market those leaves, it would make it possible for farmers to use this crop, which is so great for the environment and could fill a really great niche in climate science and sustainable agriculture, but we need to support the people in order to support the environment this way.
Mm,
First, the stakeholders have to, I think, be considered first.
yeah. That honestly, like I said before, like that is groundbreaking research. And I also think it fills a need of accessibility as well.
Mm-hmm.
Of it is something that people who are buying the product in knowing how to consume it, that is something that is also, nutritious for them, but also just like another thing that they could add, like within their daily grocery shopping, things that may be more cost effective than other greens or maybe other things that they like to eat, to where they could also do some substitutions as well for some people who may not like certain things. Well, have you tried mung bean leaves? No,
Mm-hmm.
let me try.
Yeah.
And it could be something that they really enjoy. which is so cool of just even getting to think about like no piece of the plant particularly goes wasted, like in this case,
Yeah.
which is very interesting of just kind of leading back into, like you said, like that agricultural sustainability, but I think from the profit perspective and then from a sustainable accessibility perspective, especially with everything kind of going on right now that we're dealing with and people potentially losing access to food and things of that nature. I
Hmm.
think plants are definitely a great source of being raw food for us to think about how we cook and consume. And if there are more possibilities for other pieces of plants that we may have never typically consumed to actually be something that is good for us, but also good for the people who are growing that food for us, who also have families to feed, I think that's fantastic. Like, I would need to see you guys like cooking in your kitchen lab and like like those like 70s infomercials where they
Hmm.
like have
Yeah.
introducing mung bean leaves and
Yeah.
like doing your own little tutorial. I mean, mung bean leaves, get yours today, like, and
Right.
that would
Yeah.
be so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think consumers will be incentivized to buy a crop that they know benefits the environment. And yes, like you said, when we can use the whole part of the plant, that prevents plant waste essentially. And I think could help reduce greenhouse gas emission because we actually emit a lot of greenhouse gases when we waste food, which is very sad. And that very like common statistic of Americans waste about 40% of their food. And I also think about kale wasn't super popular. A lot of people didn't really like kale, especially in the United States, but because there actually was research that went into, okay, how can we make this crop better and more enjoyable for people? And I think it's really neat that someone thought, why don't we make it like a chip and market it that way? We talked a lot when we were in the kitchen about what plants, what niche mung beans fit into their leaves in the sense of like leafy vegetable niche. And it's similar to collards and nettle and kale, but also it's its own thing entirely. So that
Mm-hmm.
was, yeah, that was a really fun day.
I can see nettle for sure. And I think like I grew up loving kale. In fact, when
Mhm.
I was younger, I think it was sixth or seventh grade, one of my science fair projects was around like growing kale. Like it was so, you just brought back a memory in my brain. But yeah, I think like you said, I don't think kale was really marketed at least in recent years, favorably. But I think, when I started eating like kale and ramen, and I liked
Mhm.
kale salads growing up, and then kale chips for soccer, how my mom prepared them, like it's just a no-brainer. It's something very nutritious, but it's something that like I could throw into anything. It's so versatile. Now imagine all the versatile mung bean leaf dishes I could think of right now. Like
Yeah. If you have any idea for what I should try with those leaves next, I'm definitely open.
no, literally, like audience, please, if you have
Please
any
chime in
ideas, please,
or try it yourself.
literally, like,
Roast mung beans, they're great.
I think that's so cool. I could think about like, what do mung bean leaves look like? Are they small? Are they big? Like, what are they?
They are large. They are large and they're
Mm.
about the size of my hand, but it depends. Um, we had a lot of genetic variation, or we had a lot of variation in terms of how the leaves turned out. Some of them were, wait, this is a podcast, so let me say it in terms of.
I mean, we're video too. Like, you can.
Okay. Some of them were like 3 inches, some of them were like 6 inches. And we had only one plant, one singular plant. So we had 110 samples, but we had 600 plants
Mhm.
grown on the plot. And out of those 600, only one individual one had lobed leaves, which
Mm.
was really, really cool. And that was my advisor's favorite and my favorite, and actually my boyfriend's favorite. And he came to help me weed sometimes, which was really great. And he would always be like, "How's that plant doing?" It was mung bean 8. I remember he was like, "How's mung bean 8?" And we'd go look at it, and he'd be like, "Oh, it's so cool." So all the other leaves are this shape, like a
Mm. Like a almost like a
spearhead.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
like a it's almost like
teardrop.
I don't know why I think of like a spade card.
Yes, yes, yeah, absolutely. And then that one was shaped, I don't even know, it was lobed. Okay, it had three lobes, and the rest of them were just one single teardrop shaped
Gotcha.
leaf.
Mm.
And that was really, really neat that out of all the genetic variation present, only one came out like that. And that is the one my advisor said would be the best to incentivize people to eat,
Mm.
which is interesting, but probably not great for my research because only one plant looks like
Right.
that. Yeah.
I was just about to say, like, you got crowned like the best, but at what cost?
At what cost? Yeah.
That is so cool. And thank you for sharing more about your research and even getting
Absolutely.
to, let us know about little M8, your favorite plant. Seems like it was just like a fan favorite all around. But
Yeah.
most importantly, like your research, I feel like, and even like what your advisor in your department and supporting this research as well, I think it does open some opportunities and some questions for this to be replicated with other plants as well, and to see, like, on a statewide scale, like what are the best, and can this study be replicated in ways where we are being able to see what are the best ways in our seed banks, what we could do statewide, what could be helpful to farmers across, but most importantly, just like with the resources that we have, the climates that we have, what is different. And something like to your effect that you said earlier of getting to test mung beans being drought resistant, because it didn't seem like there was a lot of rainfall, versus down here in Atlanta, we got rain every single time it hit 5 p.m.
What?
during the summer. We got
Wow.
every week without fail, at
Oh my
least 3 days
gosh.
out of the week, when it hit 5 p.m., we had rain. And that has never happened before in the
Strange.
my entirety of life here in Atlanta, in my 23 years of living. So I think that'd be so cool to see, like, okay, well, what would be, relevant for us and farmers, and typical in the study of, okay, we have this typical, these seed variations, but like which one is really the best for what we're dealing with. But then also on a year over year basis, as maybe like the soil starts to change or as the climate starts to change, what does that timeline look like? And how can we kind of create these spaces of maybe adaptability for farmers, and even projecting like, ooh, are there different, seeds that would be better for a different time, or different variations that would be better for a different time period. So I think you guys are definitely onto something special. I could see some people like later in the future, when we have like super fancy futuristic tools, being like, let's go back to the past of like before the 2000s, like maybe even before like the 1960s, and seeing like, what do we think could have been, the best seed variation during that time, based on what we know of like our climate data or our soil data. So I think that's just very foundational research that you guys are doing, that although many people may not hear about it, which they should though, because it's pieces of research and studies like this that enable us as an entire country, and in many cases on a global scale, like, be able to necessarily find ways and solutions, one little plant at a time, that can support our economy, but also support the people that we're feeding within our population in many different ways, and introducing people to new foods in that same respect. It's almost like another form of marketability. So I just appreciate you so much sharing that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, agroecology research is really cool, and there's a lot of great work being done. The wonderful thing about environmental science is whenever I'm doing a project that helps the environment and helps people, or even when I'm in an environmental lecture, I just get overwhelmed with a sense of joy and appreciation that people care enough to put money into studying the environment and into studying one type of bean, and
Mm-hmm.
into devoting their life to study. Some professors spend their whole time studying a species of tree, and that kind of love and appreciation for the natural world just really inspires me and pushes me forward. And agricultural research is great, and there's a lot more that we could know. There's a lot of room to grow, no pun intended. And there's a lot we could do to improve. Like, we still have huge monocultures, like rows and rows, miles
Mm.
and miles of corn mazes. And when you don't have a biodiverse ecosystem, that's very susceptible to disease, those types of things. I feel like can be improved, but there's just a lot of great work going on. And the other thing I want to touch on really quickly is you mentioned it never used to rain and you never remember it raining. And that brought up something I wanted to talk about, which is that I remember in a lecture we talked about phenology, which is a study of the seasons, but it's a study of when things happen. And a great way to communicate, because I was always curious, how do we communicate climate change to people who don't understand it or maybe are resistant to it? And a great way is just being like, what do you remember? Did it used to snow? What time did it snow? What time did the leaves turn? How
Mm,
bright were the leaves? Did it flood? Because when your house floods, you're going to remember that. When you used to get to play in the snow every year, like for me, I'm from North Carolina, every year we knew it would snow at least once. Sometimes 2 times, sometimes 3 times, but it always snowed. And now it's been a really long time since it snowed that I remember, like a real snow you could walk through. And that kind of science communication, I think, is really fascinating, where you can get into the theoretical and use the scientific terms, or you can just ask someone, what do you remember? What was your life like before? What is it like now? What have you noticed? And
mm.
that's not really using any bias or using any jargon. You're just saying, tell me about your experience. So I just wanted to mention that.
No, that's great. And I think also, one, it shows a little bit of your creative writing brain there. And even of just like how you framed your questions, which I think is really unique. And I think we do need more of that. Because we see it now of like the importance of not only being able to understand the acumen on a topic of what you're talking about, but most importantly, how can you communicate it to people that aren't in that field? And that's why people always say like, okay, can you communicate it in English? Can you talk to me like I was 5? But really being able to not only communicate it outwardly to people who understand, but creating scenarios where people can comprehend it also throughout their own words and their own experiences is a form of communication that is becoming even more important than maybe a long, long time ago, to where maybe that nuance was understood. And so I didn't know that you were from North Carolina, so that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
But for us here in Georgia, it never used to snow. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
really remember it snowing except for like twice, except at the top of this year we got snow and it was for like a week, and Atlanta doesn't do snow, so
Yeah.
everybody's like, oh no, what are we doing? But to me that also signaled in my mind, especially with like the rain and everything happening this summer, which really again has really never happened to this capacity. I was like, something's different, we need to go and look at some
Yeah.
studies, we might need to read up. But in experiences like this as well, of just the flooding that's been going on, especially within the country, a lot of the hurricanes, like it's insane, all of the different natural disasters that have happened this year. So I'm hoping more and more, as you know, you do this work, we need, you know, your brain and your uniqueness with your minors and your majors to effectively communicate, but get others to comprehend and understand through their own experiences as well within that communication.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's huge. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I want to say I love Atlanta. I have family in Atlanta, and my grandparents grew up, or my they didn't grow up there. But I grew up with my grandparents living in Atlanta, and then they
Mm-hmm.
later moved to North Carolina to be closer to us. But I used to go to Atlanta for all like our holidays, and it is really interesting living in the South and then moving to the North and seeing how the snow and how the cold impacts infrastructure, community design, and culture. Like it is
Mm-hmm.
so fascinating to me when my first snow day in Vermont, freshman year, when we still had class. Like I knew we would still have class, but still like sitting in calculus and like looking out the window and the snow is coming down, I was like, this is not right. We have to be outside. I should, because you know, in North Carolina, like if it freezes in the middle of the night, if it gets to like 32, 33 degrees and there was rain, we're not going to have school the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Which if I tell my New England friends that, they are like, what? That's ridiculous. But it's actually, there's a very fair reason for that, which is a lot of people live out in the country and live on dirt roads and you can't drive through if there's ice. There's just no infrastructure. There's no experience. There's not an understanding. And it's fascinating to come up to Vermont where it's in the winters generally always snowing. And Vermont wouldn't be able to be a place with people in it if everything shut down every time it snowed, because it snows for months and months and months. So the way that everything just keeps moving here with the snow is really cool. And the way that it impacts culture is fascinating too, because my boyfriend is from New Hampshire and his parents are from New Hampshire. And I asked them one time, I was like, why do New Englanders, they don't really want to like talk to you on the street as much? Like in North Carolina, when I walk around, people are always, you just like start having a conversation with someone. Like you wouldn't really be able to tell the difference between if you're friends or if you're not friends. Sometimes you won't be able to tell the difference. And my boyfriend's dad said something that was really cool when thinking about how the environment and how people connect, where he said, it's too cold. We don't have enough time. It's too cold to stand around and talk outside. You got to walk. You got to get into a building. You got things to do, places to be. I thought that was really neat.
That's fascinating, actually. And to your point of like, yeah, I asked my boyfriend that as well. He's from DC. So he's technically a northerner. And for me, like growing up in the South, like Southern hospitality, and then going up to like visit his family in New York or New Jersey, and they're like, like, I'm like, what's going on? But then
Yeah.
also, you know, like you said, we didn't have, you know, when snow came, everything closed. And so you talk to people that were within your house, or you talk to your friends like, hey, school's canceled, let's go do something. Or you had, you know, like neighbors outside at the park that was right up the street that you could, you know, play with and things of that nature. So but for them in the North, it's like life moves on. It's like, okay, we're
Yeah.
still going to school, we're still going to work. And I think about that and I'm like, I could never. And just seeing how that impacts us culturally, and even down again back to our communication standards of just what that's like. I'm curious. I wonder if there have ever been studies done, really studying those communication patterns during the season from a geographical perspective of just how people talk through the seasons, or how people talk through, you know, shifting seasons at that. That's something that now you have me researching. So thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I see your anthropologist, coming through. Yeah, there must be studies. There's gotta be.
Yeah, I love studying people, and I think I love a big part of anthropology is that of like from a cultural and community perspective and a linguistic perspective as well, beyond like what people typically think of like archaeology and maybe
Right.
biological evolution. But yeah, you know what? Look how agriculture got us into this space.
Oh yeah.
You are a wordsmith, Mia.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And with that, I think this will be a great point for us to close down and start
Totally.
to think about really from this dynamic and diverse conversation that we've had in so many different directions. I want to make sure, as much as you are giving to us out of your research and sharing your story and your journey, of course, like if you were to, you know, go back and let's say you started your journey from step one when you were in college and looking to get in the field or find people that can give you the support, what are some things that you need right now, whether that's from professionals or maybe within the scientific community? How can people support you in your goals moving forward?
Yeah, so I'm looking to apply to a PhD position. I'm actually in the process of applying to a lot of positions, but yeah, I'm open to advice from postdocs or researchers at any level who have something to say about getting a PhD funded, and especially finding funding in a time when it is so hard to do so. Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah.
Awesome. You guys heard her, all you PhDers out there. This is your time to shine. I definitely would encourage you all to connect with Mia. As you can tell from this amazing conversation, she is fantastic. And I think she is also going to be a part of many pieces of fundamental research that are going to move forward. So I think anybody would be very, very lucky to connect with her and learn a little bit more about her story and her research. So thank you so much again, Mia, for coming on to the show.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be able to meet you.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Intentional Intern podcast. We hope you're leaving with fresh insights and a boost of motivation to take on your career journey. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, and share it with your network. Connect with us on LinkedIn and Instagram and let us know your thoughts. Your feedback fuels our next great episode. Until next time, stay intentional, keep growing, and keep shining bright. See you in the next episode.